The question, who am I, is not pointing to a positive answer that can be registered by the senses or the mind. In fact, it is pointing to the very absence of the one who asks the question, the very absence of the questioner, to that absence from which all presence is possible. That absence, which is the totality of knowingness. The transparent conscious presence that we are. Mind can never register that. Mind only asks rhetorical questions, because whatever it can register has to already be somehow represented in its base of knowledge. When mind is asking something, it is basically just matching ideas, matching an idea to some knowledge which is already stored in the system. When there is a match, it is happy. When there is no match, it feels threatened. Who am I is not really a question, it is a paradox. It is a pointer towards the paradox of existence. It is only a paradox from the viewpoint of that separate sense of I that the mind creates. Truly there is no paradox. But from the viewpoint of the mind, it is a paradox. And the question is pointing to the very heart of it. That is why this question can trigger a recognition, the acknowledgement of our true nature, only in that case when there is already a readiness to go through that paradox to the very end of it, a readiness to die to the very absence of that separate self that initially asks the question, a readiness to see the very unreality of this separate self that poses the question and all questions. The one who asks the question, who am I, is not the same one that acknowledges the answer. The answer cannot be registered by the one who asks the question. The one who asks the question initially is a predetermined, conditioned knowledge. This conditioned knowledge can only register something which is of its own, some kind of match. But the question points to this transparent absence, which is presence. But it is not that presence which the mind is familiar with. It is not the presence in a physical sense, nor is it a presence in an emotional sense or a mental sense. It is not a presence that can be described or pointed to or spoken about. It is not a presence of that kind which has qualities. It is not a presence which is in a reality of polarities. Therefore, when the mind is seeking to understand or to grasp who am I, it is unable to. It is looking on that positive field of experience, the field from which it gathers information. It looks for some input from the senses. It looks for some input from its own ideas, understandings, calculations, comparisons, measures. And there is nothing there to answer that question. Because that question is pointing to the very totality of this isness that we are. It is pointing to that presence, which is the absence of all positive qualities, informative, mental, emotional, physical, to that which enables all of that to appear and to be experienced. It is pointing to the very knowingness, subtle, transparent, ephemeral, that we are. You can call it spiritual, it doesn't matter. Simply it is what is. It is the most simple, initial, the very source of every experience, the very source of any recognition, any knowing. It is pointing to that absence, which is presence. It is an absence from the viewpoint of the mind, of the relative, of the local. It is an absence from the viewpoint of that which has a beginning and end, that which can be defined. But it is an absence which is the totality of presence, of all possible presence, of all possible experience. It is that very transparent presence which knows, witnesses everything, and at the same time it is the very essence of that which it witnesses. It is that oneness in which all polarities, all plays of duality appear and disappear. It is what you are. It is what you have always been and always will be. It is timeless. It has no beginning nor end. It is this now that knows itself. Just like that. That which knows this very moment is absent in the sense that it is not appearing as an object, as a knower, as an entity. It is the very unity that observes itself, that witnesses itself, that takes pure, infinite joy in its very existence, through all forms and all movements. The question, who am I, is pointing to your timeless, deathless nature. To your very isness. Because there are no qualities to this presence, to this isness. It simply is. There are no other qualities. That's why it can never be registered by our mind, because the mind is a mechanism that is pointed towards positive experience, positive in the sense of appearances. It is a functional intelligence. Its orientation is towards defined knowledge, towards measuring, comparing. It cannot understand that which is higher than itself. It is a tool in the hands of this isness. It can never understand its own source. It can never know it. But it can be unified in it. When the mind becomes completely silent, when it no longer interprets, when it no longer opinionates, it is simply witnessing silently. When it dissolves as an entity, as an identity, as a separate observer, then it becomes merged in this very presence, transparent and complete. Then, when it finds its total whole peace, it becomes a perfected tool. It is not just a tool that is constantly occupied with surviving, with avoiding. It is no longer in any tension. It is pure intelligence. Intelligence which is free to operate. Open, flexible. No longer occupied with endless concerns to protect itself. It becomes a beauty, a beautiful tool, a truly beautiful tool of intelligence. But that only happens when it ceases to pretend to be the master, the owner, the doer. When it is ready to dissolve in its own source, when it is ready to enter, who am I, and to disappear there as a separate self. Who am I is a pointer. It is not a practice. It is a pointer to the one who is ready to acknowledge its own totality. To the one who is ready to acknowledge the absence of any separate self in it. It is a pointer to that mind that is not afraid anymore to die, not to be. To that mind which is no longer interested in playing the game of creating itself, maintaining itself as a center, as an entity, as some kind of psychological self. It is a pointer to that mind which is mature, to unify with its source. When the question who am I is raised, there must be a seeing of the non-reality of the one who responds. Who is this I? Who has just asked that question? That should be the direction. This has to be seen. Is there anyone here separate from this moment, this self-knowing moment of totality?